Okay, today is Sunday, February 22nd. This is Heather Sturr and Andy Wiest, along with
Jacob Palmer, Hayden Chapman, Jacob Siebert.
And we are in the New Orleans East Versailles community with Cyndi Nguyen, doing an oral history for the University of Southern Mississippi. So Cyndi, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate everything that you've done to make this happen. And we would like to start by, if you could just kind of start by telling us a little bit about what you remember from your life in Vietnam before you left and came to the U.S.
So I don't really know what my real birthday is, and because when we came to America, my parents had to change my birthday, and so please don't let Social Security know about that. I am actually a little bit older on paper. So on paper, I'm born on May 4th, 1970, but my parents told me I was born on August 29th, 1972. So that kind of gives you a little bit. So I was literally 3 years old, but I always believed I was 5 years old because I was a little bit more mature. I remember being on my father's back, coming over. My father was in the South Vietnam military, and he told me that when he came home one night, we live in a rural area in Vietnam.
What was your hometown?
So, Phu Tinh. My dad is a fisherman by trade. My grandfather was a fisherman by trade, and lived in, didn't have a lot of the basic essential, but we were a happy family.
Can you help me with the location of that? Is that on the Central Coast, South Coast?
Yeah, all I know is Phu Tinh, and more toward the water. Yeah.
Phuoc.
So Phuoc.
Yeah.
Thing.
Tinh. Okay.
Yeah. And so we're in the Bac. So we're like Bac is, I think, northern. Yeah. So there's different dialect in the Vietnamese culture. So remember my father came home. Mom was pregnant with my little brother. So we had to go, and so I was put on my father's back. And my sister, I had an older sister and an older brother, went to I remember being on a big boat, big vessel with thousands of people. And I don't ever remember being starving, but my parents, we had just really live on noodle.
So this was when you fled Vietnam?
Yeah.
Now, was this on April 30th?
Yes, on April the 30th when we left Vietnam.
Okay.
My parents would talk about, they would give us a bowl of rice, and we would have to share that with all the members in the family. There was very limited food to survive.
Do you remember, were you on a military boat? Was it a Vietnamese boat, a U.S. boat?
Don't remember that.
Yeah, that's okay.
All I remember was a big vessel. So we used to joke, now it's like fresh off the boat. So I'm like FOB.
Do you remember if you were scared at the time? Or
no, I don't think I was scared because I'm a very adventurous little girl. And so I was like, wow, we're taking a trip. Didn't really understand the whole magnitude about leaving Vietnam. Didn't even know that we were leaving our country. All I knew was I had my mom and my dad. My grandparents were with me. My sister and my brother, and I was good. I guess thinking about materialistic, we just didn't have much in Vietnam, and so whatever we had was basically what we knew of. Clothing was the most basic essential. And noodle, of course, rice and noodle was a very, something that we're very connected in our food culture. That's all we eat. And so I think I was just excited. I don't ever remember worrying because my sponsor, when we first got to America, we went to Arkansas. And so a parish in Monticello, Iowa, sponsored my family. And I actually reconnected with my sponsor. And they ended up taking care of me and putting me through high school and college. So I'll get to that. But Mary would tell me that you were always a very fun, vibrant little girl. You weren't afraid of things at all, and you adapted really well. Your parents struggled because of the language, and so I think for me it was more of a venture. But as we as I grew up in New Orleans, and particularly New Orleans and in the USA, I realized that I wasn't really connected to my culture. I was so young. But I think for me was having that journey over, even though I may not remember every little thing, but it's that memory. It's that journey that helped me connect to my culture.
Were you in a refugee camp before you ended up in New Orleans East? Where were you?
So we were in Arkansas camp.
Fort Chaffee?
Fort Chaffee, very famous one. Yeah. And so we went there to Monticello, Iowa. From Monticello, Iowa, then we came to New Orleans.
How long were you in Monticello?
3 months.
3 months. And why did you come to New Orleans?
Because all my dad's like, well, all your uncles and aunts are coming to New Orleans. There's a priest down there. There's a Vietnamese priest. We could understand them. I think finding a community that they could connect to was really their priority at that time. For my father, my grandparents, and then finding a community that they could be able to live in because of the climate. Iowa was extremely cold. My grandparents struggled with the 3 months that we were in Monticello, and so my parents. So these are my mom's parents. My parents felt like they had to get them to a location where they could be able to live, and I don't think they were looking at long term. I think they were looking at just we want them to be happy, and so we end up in New Orleans, and then of course beaucoup of Vietnamese people came to New Orleans, and I think another reason why it attracted my parents was my father's a fisherman by trade, so he struggled with finding work in Monticello. Couldn't really take care of the family. I guess my father was the type of man, and he still is, that didn't want to depend on government assistance, and so we felt, and we didn't really know what government assistance is about. We came over, and my father said, we came over to seek for freedom. We weren't looking for a handout. We just seek for freedom. And so I guess coming over here, even though with limited resources, we weren't really looking for a handout. We were looking for freedom, and then give us an opportunity where we could rebuild our lives. And I think and so they were more focused on that and finding a place that they could actually start making money, instead of saying, okay, what America's going to do for us. Yeah.
So what year would it have been when you got to New Orleans then?
What is it?
What year would it have been when you
So it'd be the end of 1975, December 1975.
So there was already a Vietnamese presence in New Orleans that early.
Oh yeah.
It must have been one of the first expatriate communities then.
I was talking to several other community members. Some of them actually came in in the early 70s. Yeah, so there was your people of status. Yeah, they came over, and then Catholic Charity who's now a bishop, Mai Thanh Lung, was already down here setting up, homes and assistance for immigrants at that time.
So when your family moved to New Orleans, did you go into the Versailles Apartments?
Yes.
You lived in it. So talk about that, what you remember from that experience.
Yeah, so I ended up working for Versailles Arms when I came back here 14 years ago. So Versailles Arms is a 400-unit multifamily housing urban development project that run by the government. So you get government subsidized for your rent. And remember, it was predominantly all Vietnamese American, from 1 bedroom to 2 bedroom to 4 bedroom. We actually started off with a 2-bedroom apartment with about 30 people. Yeah, so from my family to my uncle and my aunt and family and friends who came over, and because there was only 400 units, so you could just imagine how fast that filled up. And on an average, people were staying there. I mean, we stayed there for 13 years, but I saw some families that actually were able to move out. So give or take, you may have a 5 family move out in 3 years. So having that long waiting list, people needed shelter. And so what a lot of Vietnamese family did was for each other was just to come on into our apartment, and just stay. And many of the individuals that stayed with my family were not biological related to me, not by blood. It's just basically, on the street that my parents have known in the country and they've worked with, and we were just trying to help each other out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
What did your father and mother do when they got here? I think you said earlier your dad was a fisherman.
Yeah, so
in New Orleans.
Yeah, in New Orleans. So and then we got all the guys out on the boat to work. You know, my mom went and did shrimp peelers, and she shuckles oysters for a living. And so the female would come over, and it was cash. It was easy money. And so all the women got together, and they carpooled to go to work together. So they would get into a van, about 15 of them, and help each other out, and saved. We didn't have I don't ever remember growing up with Nikes or Reeboks at all. It was not important to us to think about this kind of stuff. We were just trying to, I guess, stay together. That was the most important thing, was to stay together, because we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know if the communists gonna come over here and take us back to our country. So it was really hard for when I was growing up, wanting to go out and play. My father would get paranoid, somebody would come and get us, even though we were in America.
So they thought a Vietnamese person would come and get, someone from Vietnam.
We just don't know. I guess for a lot of my parents was even though we made that journey, but that doesn't mean that we're completely safe. We didn't know the America's intention. We didn't know what kind of, if this is going to be home for us, or this is just temporary living until they clean up what happened in Vietnam, and then they're going to ship us back to Vietnam.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I think it was just and I think that's why people was okay, let's just save. And I think for many family, they didn't purchase home because they didn't know what to expect. But I think as year goes by and we, see, this is going to be our home, you see more Vietnamese people starting their business, buying homes, and making their establishment here in New Orleans and other areas in America.
So were you and your siblings able to go to school once y'all got here? Did that take a while?
That took a while because paperwork, so I'll go back into the paperwork. So I was too young to go to school, and so my parents had to put me in school in order for them to go to work. And so that forced them to change my age. Yeah.
Oh, so that's why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'm just 3 years older on paper. Yeah, and it was survival, basically. My mom had to go to work. Dad had to work.
So you were actually born in 72.
Yeah.
But your parents said 70 so that you could look like you were 5 to go to school. Okay, interesting. Wow.
Yeah. And they picked May because my Vietnamese name is Xuân, so Xuan.
Oh, spring.
And it's spring.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know how they got May for it. They just had to pick a number or something.
Right.
Yeah, and so all of our age are messed up. But I think for us is that it became very minute. It was just the fact that we survived.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate. My sister's still living, and my brother.
How many siblings do you have?
I have a total of 6, but I lost my little brother last year.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the one that was actually born in Monticello, Iowa, had a heart attack at the age of 39.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
so sorry for that.
And it's been hard, and so it's just kind of my parents is man, getting you guys over here was the hardest thing to do. If we were going to lose any of our kids, that would be kind of the time. And so they reflected back, 30-year journey, at that time when Monty passed away. And, we raised you and got you over here. And they felt like, they did everything. And then, so it's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you remember your parents saying about the war or Vietnam when you were growing up here in New Orleans? Did they talk about it much?
Yeah, so my father was actually part of the South Vietnam military, and Do
you know whether he was an officer or a private or anything like that?
So his last name is actually Ho, H-O. Mm. So we had to change our last name too. That's another thing I had to change. So I'm not really a Nguyen. I'm actually a Ho, H-O.
Why did you have to change your last name?
My father said that a Ho would link to communist last name, and we would never be able to come over to America.
Because of Ho Chi Minh?
Yeah. Yeah, and so they changed our last name to Nguyen. But I am married to Nguyen, so technically I am a Nguyen.
Yeah.
So my name is actually my real name is Ho Thi Ngọc Xuân.
Ah.
We always say our last name first in Vietnamese. Yeah, so Ho, H-O, and then Ngọc is my middle name, and Xuân is actually my first name given by my parents.
Do your parents call you
They call me
Swan?
Cyndi. No, they call me Cyndi.
They call you Cyndi.
Yeah, so because I only respond to Cyndi. So I guess growing up in America and as a Vietnamese American woman, I face a lot of cultural challenges. I find that Vietnamese women we hesitate to speak up. We hesitate on a lot of part. We're kind of like very nice, disgustingly nice and obedient. I love being obedient, but I just feel like we should be our own woman. And so growing up, idolizing Cyndi Lauper, I just love her personality, and she was just who she is. And I think that should be in every culture. And so when I became a U.S. citizen in 1991, the USA gave us one opportunity to change our name without charging us a fee. So that's when we become naturalized. I'm sorry that you guys couldn't get that at all, because I know you guys have to pay to get an attorney to get your name changed. But we were granted that privilege, so I took that opportunity to change my name to Cyndi. So it's C-Y-N-D-I, exactly like Cyndi Lauper. I kept my first name, Swan, as my middle name, and Nguyen. So it's Cyndi Swan Nguyen is my legal name now.
That is awesome. And that was what year again?
1991 when I became a
U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about what you were saying about kind of being a Vietnamese woman, but also an American. But before we get to that, you had started to talk about what you remember your parents saying about Vietnam and the war when you were young. Can you go back to that?
My mom was, one of those, it's a very typical Asian woman where she wasn't into my father's work at all. Her responsibility was just to take care of the family. And so remember Dad coming home and saying, we gotta go, the war is coming, there's soldiers out there, we have to leave our country. And Mom was already ready. Mom just had all of us packed up, the little things that we were able to carry on with us, and we left. And my father talked about the war all the time, and I remember him saying, I would never regret not leaving Vietnam, because I can't imagine leaving you guys there. We're staying in Vietnam, in a country that we cannot have our freedom. My father, I think he has some pictures of him when he was in the military with his buddy, but he didn't spend a very long time in there. He made a very quick decision to leave the military and flee with his family. I think he realized that the war, that we were losing, depending on which side you're on. But he wanted to make sure that we get over to America as well. And so, and I think that forced him to change our last name, birthday, and to get us over here.
Were your parents worried at all about you and your siblings becoming too American?
Oh no, I don't think that was even on their mind at that time. I mean,
like
now,
a little later, because I know there's a tension in many of the Vietnamese families that I've interviewed about the parents trying to hold on to what it is to be Vietnamese.
Yeah.
And the young people.
My father is a very strong Vietnamese man. I remember growing up, his discipline policy is very strong. It's like literally Vietnamese style. I used to hate my parents for being so culturally traditional with us. As I'm older now, I realize the value behind it. My parents were not, they're not like racist or discriminatory. They just feel really strongly about their culture. So dating somebody outside of our culture was like, God forbid. Even hanging out with somebody that didn't look like us. But my parents are like loving parents. They were, I think, for my father, particularly for my father, he missed his country greatly. When we first came over, he struggled a lot with taking care of his family. If we were back in our country, he would always say, then we would have, a life where we could always be together, that I could go and work and your mom would stay home and take care of you. But Mom couldn't stay home and take care of us in America because she had to go out and work. And so that became a conflict for him, not allowing his wife to be the woman that he needs her to be for us. And so, and I think growing up, you know, with me idolizing Cyndi Lauper, you could just imagine how much trouble I got into growing up. So,
what was it like going to school? Were you at a school with mostly Vietnamese kids, or were you in the minority at your school? Or
we were actually the majority at our elementary school because there were thousands of Vietnamese families. So before Katrina, we're one of the largest concentrated Vietnamese community in the United States, meaning that we had over 10,000 families in this area, in a very small area. And on an average, family size in those days were like 6 to 8 children. You know, this family size has shifted lower now. But so we were in school with, you know, I was in school with a lot of the Asian kids, but also American students as well. And I think our parents struggled because we were, I mean, I think for us, it's like we were finding out, oh, we speak English, but then when we get home, there's another language was spoken to us. But then when we get to school, our American friends are doing something. And one of the things that I remember was that, you know, American people were very affectionate toward, parents were very affectionate toward their children. My parents were not. You know, my parents was like, so in the Vietnamese culture, it's like, if you have food on the table and you have nice, like your clothes doesn't have any holes, I mean, your parents love you. It was an understatement. They didn't have to tell you that they love you. They didn't have to give you a hug every day. And so I think for a lot of us growing up, we didn't recognize that I didn't recognize that until I got to high school. So I graduated here up until 8th grade. I got into so much trouble. My parents was like going crazy with me. I ran away from home like 3-4 times. Not because my parents weren't good parents, it's just that I just got into a lot of different things that culturally my parents struggled. And I think because how we were acting up, my father always said, you know, if we were back, my father still say this, if we were back in Vietnam, shucks, you guys would be in a lot of, you guys would get a big whipping. Yeah, like, and you guys can't call 911 on us. You know, that's just literally. It wasn't a threat. We've always seen it as a discipline policy in our family. But I didn't realize the affection until I went to high school. So I got kicked out of 2 high school, by the way.
in New Orleans?
No, in other states.
Oh.
My parents actually had to send me away for school because I was boarding school with the nuns.
Was this in Iowa?
No, before Iowa. So I went to the Sister of Carmelite in Missouri City, Texas. So my father said, well, maybe living with nuns will help calm you and bring you back to to Vietnamese culture.
How old were you when you...
So I was a freshman in high school, so 15 years, yeah. So I went to the Sister of Carmelite in Missouri City, Texas, with 30 other Vietnamese kids from all over the country where parents felt like we needed discipline violence.
What had you done anything specific that caused you to... You said you got kicked out of school here, and so your parents sent you there?
Yeah, I got kicked out, ran away from home, hung out late at night. We lived in an apartment on the 2nd floor. We jump off from the 2nd floor almost every other night. And my parents was like, wait, your older sister's nice, your brother's okay, your little sister's always praying. What happened to you? I don't know, So, but went to the convent for a year, and I got kicked out of the Sister Carmelite.
What happened?
Smuggled some guys into the convent, did some drugs in the convent. The typical teenager stuff.
Yeah.
And so then I applied to the Sister Dominicans in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So they were excited to welcome me up to Wisconsin. So I went up to Wisconsin and got kicked out at the end of that year.
For same reasons?
Not really. They accused me of hanging a dissected pig in front of the nuns' room.
That's great.
Yeah, and so then
you didn't do that?
Of course not. No evidence of that. So there was about 40 of us, Asian kids, girls, all girls. I guess the nuns believed that we were going to become sisters. Many of us were there because of discipline, because a lot of our parents were working more so in those days, and then really didn't have, and trying to figure out, okay, who's my kid and stuff like that. But it was a sophomore year when I realized, I think it was my turning point for me. So I was coming home, so I'm like the coolest girl with the nuns. So my girlfriend from California said, hey Cyndi, let's just go down to New Orleans. I convinced my parents to let me go down with you because they think you're a sweetheart. I said, of course. So I brought 3 of my girlfriends from other state down to New Orleans. So we flew from Milwaukee back to New Orleans. I haven't seen my father for like a year and a half because I was traveling for school. So when I come home, he'll be gone for fishing. And so I thought it was pretty safe to bring my girlfriend home. And so I remember we flew into New Orleans and we're walking down the aisle. And in those days, your family could actually meet you at the gate, right? And so I'm walking really cool. So we're talking about what we're going to be doing in New Orleans, the stunt that we're going to try to do. And so here this Asian, funny-looking guy walking toward me. And so my girlfriend is like, oh my God, there's some funny-looking guy running towards somebody. So I looked up, and it was my father. He literally ran up and hugged me. And I didn't know how to respond to him at all. And he's just like, I miss you so much. And all my girlfriends like, ugh. Because it's really disgusting when your parents hug you. And when we were growing up.
So you were, what, 15 or 16 at this
exactly.
point? Yeah.
And so I think it was when I realized the connection I have with my father. And he's never have hugged me or cried. And after that year, I straightened up.
Yeah.
So even though I got kicked out, but after that, that's when I went to Iowa and cleaned up. And
that was through your sponsor family?
Yes.
Now, did your parents contact them, or how did you?
We were actually in contact with Mary and Gus New Orleans for like years and years. And I remember I got kicked out of Milwaukee, and I came home, and my dad said, well, Cyndi, you're going to have to go to Saratoga High School here. And I'm like, wait, I can't go to school with all these crazy kids. They're so bad, Dad. I was like, I can't. And then my dad's like, seriously? I'm like, yeah, there's no way. It's too many kids. I'm used to a small classroom because I've been spoiled by the private school sector. And so I was like, oh my God, how am I going to survive? And my girls was like, girl, we better be back in the girl gang. Because I used to be in a girl gang when I was growing up.
Used to be in a what?
In a female gang.
Oh, yeah.
When I was young. And my girlfriend's like, hey, we could come back and hang out and chill. And I'm like, okay. And I found myself, my attitude was a little bit different. And then I was on the phone with Mary New Orleans, which is one of my sponsor. And Mary and Gus, they were in their 60s at that time.
What is their last name?
New Orleans, Norlins.
Okay.
Monticello, Iowa.
Yeah.
And so Mary's like, well, Swan, when would you come up to Monticello, Iowa? I was like, great. So I told my dad, I said, listen, they're white folks. I can't be bad up there. I'm not going to get into any trouble. My dad is like, you're going to go up there and embarrass us, and because they're very big on image. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to behave. I promise you. Oh my God, when I flew over Monticello, Dubuque, Iowa, I looked down, I was like, holy shit. What the hell did I get myself into? There is no civilization down there. I was like, oh my God, I didn't even see any bodies moving. I didn't even see no highway. I'm like regretting it, right? So I'm just like sweating. And by the way, when I said idolize Cyndi Lauper, I actually looked like Cyndi Lauper in those days, so I shaved my hair. My hair was all shaved to the side, and I had color. I wear the spikes, how Cyndi Lauper used to wear it. And so that's how I came to Monticello, Iowa. And Mary New Orleans is your older Caucasian female person that had her dress up to her waist, nice hairly done. And Mary has glasses that fall off of her nose.
Yeah.
And she carries a little purse. So you could just imagine how we met. Yeah. So
And she hadn't seen you since you were 5.
Since I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
And so I got off of the commuter airplane. So it's a little airplane that holds about 10 people. And so Mary and Myrna, which is her friend, who also helped my family, both of the ladies came out with a little purse. And I'm out there with tight jeans, ripped jeans, my hair's all shaved to the side, and my hair, I had spiked hair up here, and I had spike on my wrist, and I think we both looked at each other, and I actually came back and visited Mary after I graduated the whole story. Now I had children, and Mary told me, "Go, Swan, I was nervous when I first met you." She never told me that when I was living with them. She goes, "I was really nervous," but I said it was something about you that I felt okay. So I came to Monticello, and Gus Norland used to be a mayor for Monticello. So he was retired. So he ran a Napa store. So they both retired. We used to live in the Ernest Hemingway house. Ernest Hemingway has a house in Monticello, Iowa, that my parents, they're now my parents, that we lived in. So I was able to live in that home when I was in Monticello. Our home was actually made for public to come and tour during Christmas holiday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a very historical home. And Iowa was the turning point. It was helped me shaped up, but then I was also very appreciative because Mary and Gus has always ensured that I kept my tradition, my culture. How
did they do that?
They by allowing me to, like, food that I eat. So my parents would send food up, and they would not just like I would have my own food and they would have their food. They would eat with me.
Oh, awesome.
And my dad, Gus, would stay. So Gus is a big historian guy. You would love Gus. He would stay up all night and tell me stories about the Cherokee and the Indians. And he would fall asleep on his sofa and TV's still on. And then Mary would be upstairs and goes, "I told that man to turn off that light before he go to sleep." And in the morning I'll wake up and they will have coffee, and they always have like breakfast stuff and stuff that I was never exposed to. And then I see how affectionate they were with their children. So Mary and Gus also have 7 children of their own too. Wow. Tim was the youngest, and Tim at that time was already in his 30s. And so everybody moved out. So I was kind of like the little baby sister in the family. And they call me Swan because they have a daughter named Cyndi. And so that's why they call me Swan. And when I'm back in Monticello, they refer to me as Swan and not Cyndi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went to high school, you graduated high school there.
Yep.
And then college?
So so my plan was just to finish high school. Because I said high school is good enough. Then I went home to New Orleans. I stayed home, and Mary's like, "Well, Swan, you may want to consider college." I say, "Oh, don't worry, Vietnamese people, we don't have to go to college. My family, none of us going to college. I'm gonna go home and hang out with my girls and just chill." And so I came home and chilled for 2 weeks, and I think the second day I was like literally bored out of my mind. I was like, this is so unproductive. So I realized there was other stuff that I should do with my life, and so it was funny how that happened. So I didn't even apply for college at all. Didn't do, federal grants, anything. So I called my mom, Mary, up in Iowa, and she actually had my airline ticket ready for me and my application to Loris College. So I said,
Loris, okay.
Yeah, Loris College. So I flew back to Iowa 2 weeks after my summer break and did all my paperwork and started college at Loris. Started my freshman year at Loris the year after I graduated.
That's great. What did you major in?
Social work.
Okay.
Yeah, so social work is a very unique field that many Vietnamese people don't go into. But I've always behind my radical behavior. I've always loved and love people. And so I was supposed to be a fashion designer. I was supposed to go into Asian people in those days was always big on math. So I was supposed to be an accountant. Then I'm like, God, shit, this would be really boring. Just account somebody. I mean, it won't be boring count other people's money, but it would be just boring just counting. And so I don't know how I got into. I think through my counseling at Loris College, my career assessment indicate that I should be a social worker.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what I majored in. So I ended up staying up in Iowa for another 4 years.
Yeah.
Did you meet your husband while you were up there?
No. I didn't meet my husband until I actually met him in Houston, Texas. Yeah. So one of the things I'll share this story with you guys. Sean would probably turn red. So not that other men and I see this more in our culture. Asian men are very family-oriented, extremely family-oriented. They would basically make sacrifices, either, and I'll say this, financially, sexually, emotionally, whatever it does, they would make those sacrifices for their wife or for a partner that they want to be with. And so my husband's, I learned later, find out, I'm actually his little brother's best friend. Sean has had my picture in his wallet for 10 years before we met.
Oh.
I know, isn't that, yeah. He carried, he's like, he didn't date anybody. He said he believed that one day he's going to meet me. And so I went through, I got married and got divorced. And
This
so
was after college?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, made all my mistake. And in my culture, as a Vietnamese woman, when you're divorced, you're basically considered a wasted product. You know, especially I had a daughter already. My daughter's now 22 years old. But I've always believed, and I think that's the strong side of me, is that I always believe that I'm a good person. I just made a buku of mistakes. But I always try to make the right decision. And so after going through a divorce, and then I was, you know, my grandparents didn't even talk to me for years because divorce is not something that they embrace very well. Even early on with the mixed racial couples, it wasn't very well accepted. Now it is. Now divorce is like very known. But when I was getting through divorce, my parents didn't want to talk to me. My grandparents didn't want to talk to me. So I was kind of like cut out of the family for a while. So I live in Texas, and so one day I was out hanging out with Cody, which is my husband's little brother. I went to his parents. So Cody said, well, why don't you just go to my parents' house and hang out? And then the next day we'll go out again. I said, okay, cool.
And they're Vietnamese?
And they're Vietnamese, yeah. I went there, slept on the sofa. Sean came home from working. And 11 months later, we got married.
Oh, now when was this?
Like 1998. So we got married in 1999.
And how long was this after you had graduated from college?
So after I graduated from college in 1993.
Okay.
So it was,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you were in Houston working?
I was in Houston working. So I got divorced in Houston. I sent Serena home with my parents. So Serena was actually, so when I was pregnant in college, my parents were less embarrassed because I wasn't in New Orleans. I was away. Mm-hmm. In the old days when girls got pregnant, they would send us away so we could have the baby somewhere else, and then miraculously, and it was actually, and my sister won't talk about it, but my older sister was already married. She was supposed to adopt my daughter, but I didn't fall into the culture. I said that this is my daughter. I'm going to raise her. And typically in the older days, when one of us had screwed up, the older sister would bail us out, and then they would adopt. So that's why it's all messed up with, like, some of the older women, they don't have children of their own, so their little sister would screw up, and then they would just take them in as their own children, and people would not even know. Yeah, but I didn't allow that, and I think that's one of the reasons why my parents didn't talk to me for a while, because they didn't know how to handle me when I was going to come home, because they knew I was going to come home after I graduate with a baby, and they had to explain to our relatives on reference to how did Serena came about. Yeah, so it was hard for my family, but I struggled with Sean's parents. Sean is actually the oldest son, so with being married to the oldest son in a Vietnamese family, it's extra burden because no parents want their oldest child to be married to a woman that's already been married and have children. And so I had to face that, but I guess through growing up, I also realized that it was my mistake. It's not their mistake. And I wasn't even upset with my in-laws, but I knew I had to be respectful. And so while they were trying to adjust to who I am, one good thing about my husband is that he did not allow his parents to take advantage of me. He didn't allow his parents to speak down to me. He didn't allow his parents to mistreat me in any way. We allowed them to be however they want to be toward me. And I believe that it was a matter of timing that they're going to realize that it was my mistake and that I'm not a bad person. And so now Sean and I have been married for 16 years, and they actually call me for everything. I actually hold their money. So in some family, The children will keep the parents' money for them. And so they give me their money, so I put in a saving account for them, and then whenever they need it, they will let me know. And so that's a big thing when your in-laws trust you, right?
Oh yeah.
With their money.
Mom wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So I think for me was the fact that, America, changed a lot of us. I think, my parents would say that if we were back in Vietnam, we won't be the kind of person we are. And that's probably very true. I probably would have more than 6 kids. I probably would not be very strong-headed. But I think that being strong-headed is nothing wrong with it. I think being responsible for your own action is a good thing, and not, allowing other people to take advantage of it. So, yeah. So I'm that's why I'm very blessed in many ways, because as a Vietnamese, and I always try to I've dated American guys, in college. I've dated black, I dated white, I dated Pakistani. I think for me was always the fact that, I find that some Asian guys are very affectionate, and you just have to find, and I think that's consistent in every culture.
Yeah.
But predominantly why I love my husband a lot is because of the tradition that he keeps in with him. So he came over, he's a little bit older than me, but he very Americanized as well, but very traditional, where, respectful to me as a wife. He doesn't require me that I have to be in the kitchen, because he doesn't want me in the kitchen because I don't know how to cook. And so that's another blessing I have, is that a lot of Asian women, girls were raised to be in the kitchen at all times. I wasn't raised that way. And so when I married Sean, his parents had a major problem with that, because they're very traditional. And they didn't understand why I wasn't not in the kitchen. And Sean's just like, well, Cyndi, she went to college and went to work, and stuff like that. And I'm not going to expect her to do that. And anyway, I don't want her to cook anyway. You don't want to eat her cook.
Did his family come over in 75 also? Yeah, it was his father in the South military?
Yeah.
You have 6 children total?
Yep.
What would you like them to know about Vietnam?
That is a very loving, nurturing country. A country that has people that are very passionate, determination. One of the things that I want them to also remember, that we're very resilient people. We're survival. I'll share you guys this story. When we evacuated from Katrina, at that time I only had 3 daughters. Our home was flooded. We did not have insurance on our home. My husband did not know that. Sean did not know that at the time. And we basically left New Orleans on a temporary basis, thinking that we'll be home in 3 days. So we didn't have a savings set up, lost a lot of stuff, and then I literally lost it. I went to a trauma attack. Like, I couldn't breathe. I felt like everything was swallowing down. And then my mom shook me and said, I know you were very young when we first came to America. She brought me back that day, and she goes, but we did well. We didn't have FEMA. We didn't have food stamps. We had each other, and we took care of each other. And we did well, Cyndi. You could do it now. And let me tell you, I share that with people all the time, because if it wasn't for that moment that my parents took me back in the 70s when we first came to America, I would literally probably go mental. I would be very stressed out from the evacuation with Katrina, now that I'm older. And then because of that message, I was encouraged to rebuild my home. I was encouraged to continue to go back and restart our life again, not thinking that we couldn't do it. Because my parents remember when we came over, we had our 2 bare hands, and that's all we had. And we were able to build our home here, and you can. And so, that's what I want Serena, Alexis, Shauna, the triplets, Sean Jr., Alex, and Eden, to remember that Vietnam is a beautiful country. I don't think I want them to go back to Vietnam to live. This is their home. This is our home now. but I want them to continue a lot of tradition and values that the Vietnamese culture has brought to America. And there's nothing wrong being different at all. You don't have to look like your American friends and sound like them. Be who you are. And I think for kids, for a lot of our kids, is that they have identity crisis. That Serena is afraid to speak Vietnamese because she thinks it sounds weird. So when she speaks English, it's a sound that she recognizes. But then when I asked her to nói tiếng Việt Nam, với người ngoài, she thinks it sounds kind of, And yeah, so the sound is not adapting to her, and we're trying to encourage her to be willing to be open-minded and listen to our sound, because it's a very loving voice. Yeah, the terminology is very connected. Like when you guys have a girlfriend, and honey in American is like honey, but when you say the word am to your girlfriend, am is like honey. For a Vietnamese woman to hear that, it's like, God, it's like, you just turn me on, kind of like that thing, because it's a very passionate terminology. And I teach that to my American friends, and they will go home and say it to his wife, and they're like, wow. So it's a little bit different, but it's a very loving language. So, yeah.
Tell us the story about why you can't go back to Vietnam.
So when I came back to New Orleans in 1998, one of my first volunteer work with the Vietnamese community was to get this bill passed at the state legislature in 2001. And so the Vietnamese community prior to that was working to ramp up a campaign to have a bill passed that would recognize the South Vietnam flag as the official flag of the Vietnamese community. And so when I came back, they were looking for somebody that was bold enough, didn't worry about anything. So of course they met Cyndi Nguyen. And so they're like, can you do it? I was like, sure I can. They didn't have, they're like, here, this is the paperwork. And it was like, on our way to Baton Rouge. I'm like, okay, no big deal. I really didn't really understand the whole impact behind it at all. But I wanted to serve the Vietnamese community. And so we went up to the state legislators and asked in front of the Senate committee, and we proposed a bill to that the state of Louisiana recognize that the South Vietnam flag is the official flag of the Vietnam of the Republic. And all the other states were they had communist group that was fighting against that bill, and so they got shot down. We were the first state to get it passed. And so it was just like, so my picture was plastered all over the Vietnamese magazine. We had celebration after celebration in the state of Louisiana. And because of that, so my parents believed that my pictures actually posted at the airport in Vietnam. And so I'm like, well, what if I go get a nose job, or because I used to have short hair, so now I have longer hair. I'm older now. They're like, Cyndi, don't even try. And so we had people that actually went back to Vietnam, and they were not given a visa. So when you go back to Vietnam, you have to ask for a visa to go into the country. Without that visa, you can't. And so you could get to Vietnam, but can you get in or not is another question. Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons. And then I think for me is the fact that I just didn't want to put myself in jeopardy. I have 6 kids now. I can't think just about Cyndi Nguyen, Think about my husband and my children. And I think, my life, it's like my parents worked really hard to come over here. And believe me, I crave to go back to Vietnam. I mean, it's a crave. It's now called craving. But I also recognize that my work here is also helpful in a way for the culture, for the community. And so my friends always go back and they'll bring me stuff back. So it's kind of nicer that way. And plus, you don't have to spend all that money back there. Because, like when people, my parents went back. So my brother's actually marrying a girl from the country. So a lot of the guys are going back to the country and marrying the girls now. And they bring them over here. And so my cousin did it. So my brother just married a girl over there, and so they're working to sponsor the girl over here. Yeah. So we're still working to bring people over here as well. So it's not like the journey came over and that was it. Yeah. Cool. So.
What do you do now? You have You do so many things in the community.
Yes.
What do you do?
Yeah, so professionally, I serve as the executive director for a nonprofit that I helped co-found 14 years ago. It's called VIET. So it's Vietnamese Initiatives in Economic Training. And VIET is, we're the first local nonprofit that are set up to target non-English speaking communities in the state of Louisiana. And we work to develop educational and economic training program. And we also act as a resource center for non-English speaking community. Our whole vision behind VIET is to provide mainstream concept to connect the non-English speaking community into the American society and to bridge the gap as our people face language and cultural barriers. And so a lot of our work, while our direct service work directly with families and individuals, but we also are a huge advocate for the non-English speaking community. For instance, like during disaster time, making sure that our government entity understand that not everybody understand English, that there's other people in the state of Louisiana that has other language issue, from disaster preparation to educating others, employment opportunity, making sure that people have equal access to employment as well. And then when they get there, for them to understand the culture, So we do a lot of diversity training, awareness with different companies. So we do a lot of outreach and education. One of the things that we're starting to work on this year is domestic violence. So, as we have a lot of rich culture in the Vietnamese culture, but we also have issues in our community as well. And so VIET is working to provide outreach and education on domestic violence to ensure that our abuser understands and our victim understands and know resources that are available in our country. So, in Vietnam, domestic violence is really common. It's not like it's illegal or anything. I think a lot of the stress factor, and that's not an excuse to beat up somebody at all, but I think for the Vietnamese guys, that is one of the stress of coming over here. My father was an abuser, so I grew up in that environment. It was really hard because I've always believed that, I just don't believe in harming people, and I struggle with, and that's one of the reasons why, my father and I we weren't really connecting, because I grew up seeing stuff in my culture that like child abuse. I didn't realize it was child abuse until my freshman year in college at Loras College, when I first took my class Intro to Social Work, and realized that some of the abuse that happened in our culture could be potentially labeled as child abuse, but we saw it as discipline. Yeah, and so, I think for us is that as we continue our 40-year here in America, is for us to work on some of the tradition that may receive a lot of controversial, like domestic violence and child abuse, and helping our community, our resident, other avenues, other way of dealing with their conflict. And so I think that's going to be it's like really now to adjust. Now we have 40 years that we've came over here, learn about the culture. And I think there's always room for improvement. And that's one of the areas that we really need to improve on, is to look at some of our culture and really examine it and be honest to ourselves. We have to be honest to ourselves as a community that domestic violence is not acceptable. Child abuse should not take place. But we have to educate our people in reference to, what it means to separate discipline from abuse. I still discipline my children. And I'll share this with you. So when Serena was growing up, I used the Vietnamese discipline policy, not to the extreme with my parents. My father, remember my brother, you thought I was bad, my brother was worse. My father would literally hang him from the ceiling down. Yeah, he would hang, tie Tony up and from the ceiling, and he would be down for hours. And that was discipline. But I remember Serena growing up, trying to raise a little girl, Vietnamese, and she's wanting to date. And, Sean and I both have to go to work, and, Serena, just did a lot of funny stuff, and so I would discipline her, whip her behind, and then my second oldest daughter, Alexis, is now 15 years old. So a few months ago, Alexis got into trouble. I was like, okay, I'm a social worker, so I tend to reflect and process and evaluate my action and say, what can I do better? And so I get a call from Serena. She's at LSU. She goes, Mom, and I say, yeah. And she goes, I heard about what happened with Alexis. I said, Mom, let me just say something to you. You're an awesome mom. I can't thank you enough. I said, but you really need to think about how you discipline us. I said, what do you mean, Serena? She goes, Mom, you used to whip my ass so bad. You know that when you whip me, I don't really listen. But when you have another strategy that you use with me, is when you speak to me calmly and and use the word what we call "gon" is child in Vietnamese. When you speak to me in your native language, "gon," it touched my heart, and I'm like, what? She goes, are you trying to get Alexis out of trouble? She goes, Mom, seriously. She goes, that's why I'm calling you, because I know you're struggling with this. And she goes, try talking to Alexis. If you talk to her, I guarantee you'd get more out of us than spanking us. And it brought home for me. It basically it softened me. So we have a huge pride in our culture too, and I think in every culture, especially when we're parents and when you're getting advice from your children. It's like thank God she's doing it in pride, because I don't know how I would act in front of my peers, right? So I was in my back house, and I said, you know what? God damn it. That's I said, God damn it. It's like, what? She's right. And I told Sean, and Sean said, well, honey, well, you know how I feel about the discipline. I'm with you also, but our children are different now. They're not like us anymore. And Sean and I had to talk about it because we grew up in the same generation. He's like, he said, but remember how our parents used to whip us and how we felt? I said, yeah. I said, but God, these kids are out of control. And I don't want them to go through the path that I've had to go through. Because I don't know if they're going to get out the same path as I did or not, because they're a different breed. Mm-hmm. And so, and Sean and I remind us, but Cyndi, we raise our kids right. And they may make a little mistake. And so, we went and talked to Alexis. And Alexis like, well, Mom, I know my mistake. I felt really bad. I just didn't know how to tell you. And so we pride ourselves on having a very open relationship with our children too. And I think I told Alexis, and she's like, well, you're not very close to your parents. I said, because of our culture. I said, but I don't want that to be with us, because I know you guys are from a different breed. You guys, so we try to keep a very open relationship with our children. And it's a struggle for a lot of Vietnamese parents, a lot of Vietnamese families. I talk to my peers, and they're like, you have what? Talking time? It's like, what the hell is that? And I said, time just for your kids to share with you. I'll tell you this quick thing. Last night, I think I was telling you, Heather. So I get a phone call at 3 a.m. last night from the police.
Uh-oh.
Miss Cyndi. I say, yeah. I said, all my children are accounted for. I said, what are you talking about? He's like, well, there's about 15 juvenile. They trespassed a house, and we're about to take them to jury. And then when they say that they know you, we know you too. So we need you to come out here. This is at 3 a.m. this morning.
And somebody else's. They're not your kids.
They're not my kids. Yeah. And so when I get there, they basically trespassed a home, brought liquor in and weed in. And they were smoking, and they even have the pipe and everything. And so we told them, call their parents. They refused to call their parents. They said, well, we know Miss Cyndi Nguyen. And so I get out there, and they goes, Miss Cyndi, you can't tell my parents, because they would literally kill me. And so I find myself really out of place for a second. It's like, what are we coming to, you guys? And I looked at the kids. I said, I know you guys are born here, but I said, your parents didn't even use drugs when we came over here. If we did, y'all wouldn't be here at all. I said, you guys are not really appreciating your freedom. They're like, well, it's the new year. And I said, bullshit. It doesn't matter. But it was just really funny. And I think for me, I'm thinking like, okay, we really need to look at family dynamic in our culture. Really need to look at how to educate my generation on connecting with their children, because these kids that were there last night, the youngest was 15 years old. So it's actually my peers, are their parents. And they're going out and doing this at night, and parents have no idea. And then one parent came, and the gentleman's like, oh no, my son he's an A student, he doesn't use drugs, he doesn't drink. He was the one that brought the weed in, and he admitted to it. And so the father literally went into shock, and he couldn't say nothing. And all he did was put his head down and walked out. And let me tell you, he didn't have to say anything. He said enough with his action. And so I think for me is this morning was a realization that we still got more work to do. Making sure that our tradition, but then also looking at some of our tradition and aligning with our American culture now, with the kids that we're raising. So in that way, our children do not get suffocated, and that they could embrace our culture better in their own way. Yeah.
Andy, do you have any other questions?
The only other thing I was wanting to touch on, you mentioned your own experience, but this area was devastated by Katrina, correct?
Yeah.
How big an impact did that have on the community, or is that something you feel you can speak to?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So Sean and I rebuilt our home October 2015, 2.5 months after Katrina. We were probably one of 5 families back here in pitch dark. The entire community were affected by it. Again, going back to Mary Queen of Vietnam, if it wasn't for the church and for individual, and I think for many Vietnamese people, they knew they were coming back. It was a matter of when. At that time, you had to get a permit to come home. You couldn't just come home. My husband works, he's a hydraulic consultant, so through his job, we were able to get a permit. And through my nonprofit, we restarted my nonprofit to help people, so we were able to get a permit to come back in. There was no question at all that the Vietnamese community was not going to rebuild. I think starting in November, more families started coming home. I really believe that if it wasn't for the Vietnamese community in this area, the city of New Orleans lights would never turn on. Other community would not come home at all. We rebuilt our home in the dark, no running water. I remember Sean would have to bring in propane every time when we come in the morning, and water, drinking water, food. There was no resources at all. The thing for us is the fact that this is home. We stayed in Houston, Texas during the evacuation. I spent 60% of my time finding a parking lot, if not stuck in traffic. What I missed the most was having time with my children. Shauna, the triplets weren't there at that time, but my youngest daughter, she was about 1.5 years old. And so thinking back to not having time with my kids, it scared the shit out of me. And so we had to come back to New Orleans. And like I said, there was never a question in reference to we were going to rebuild. We were going to rebuild. It was a matter of when the government's going to allow all of us to come back in. And we rebuilt prior to if there was any government assistance. And I think that just kind of demonstrate the determination, because the government assistance program didn't come in until 1.5 years, almost 2 years after. There was a lot of people that lost, that didn't have insurance, like myself. I just had homeowners insurance. And, we got like $17,000 back from homeowners. $17,000 is nothing trying to rebuild a home. But Sean and I was very determined that this is home for our, and we didn't want our kids to go without a home for any time longer. We were in a FEMA trailer. really tight and cramped. Our home is about 2,000 square feet, so it's not big, but it was very spacious enough for, with 3 children. And, and so I think when we think about our children, we just felt like, we had to do what we had to do. And my parents were going to come back, and so Texas doesn't allow us to be close to our family. Here, my parents live down the street, my sister lives down the street, my other little sister lives down the street. And so it's really home, and it's a community where you can't find anywhere else in the United States at all. And so while I love the entertainment lifestyle, going out at night, but I love most is the family oriented. And, and raising a family, now that I have 6 kids, New Orleans is more affordable than anything. In the United States, it's too costly. So, but there was no question that this community was not going to rebuild. So when you look at the data now in New Orleans, Michoud, which reflects the Vietnamese community, Michoud reflect more people rebuilding versus the Bullard, the Reed, the Crowder. We have less blighted homes in our community, while we've also embraced other families, new family into our community. So the Latino community are growing in our community. But we still have family that are coming back here that moved away since Katrina. We now are embracing a lot of family from our country that are coming over through sponsorship. And so they find that New Orleans is more suitable. You could still find work even if you don't speak the language. You could still take care of your family. Children, we have resources here that will help you put your children into the proper school so you don't face like what we did, So now, my organization makes sure that those kids are in school and that they are able to tap into any assistance that the government has, and then we align them with employment. Yeah. I know it's a long answer, Andy.
That's a perfectly good answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Fellas, anything else we missed? Or?
You mentioned a bunch of cultural differences between Vietnamese and American culture, and I was wondering, you mentioned several things about cultural blocks. I was wondering if there's anything that's ever blocked you personally as far as opportunities in America.
Yeah, so before I grew up I feel like there's opportunity out there is how gutsy you are to go out and get it. And at one point, sometimes I'm timid and shy, believe it or not. Sometimes I feel like I don't have the qualification to do it. And I'll use this as an example to answer your question. So when I started the nonprofit organization, I just had a bachelor's degree. And I didn't want anybody to say that I did not have the capability or skills or talent to run an organization as a woman, as a Vietnamese American woman, as a minority. And so I've been raised to always equip myself with all of the tools that I need to have so I could participate and take the challenge on. It doesn't matter who's in the challenge. I love to compete. And because of that, Sean and I got married. I was already pregnant with Alexis, my second oldest. I went back and got my master's degree. So I ended up with an organizational management because I did not want anybody to say I couldn't do it. And I think it reminds me when my parents said, when we came over to America, this is opportunity. It's up to you. And my father always said, you have 2 hands, you have 2 legs, and you have a mouth, and you have a brain. Use it to your advantage. Don't ever let anybody say that you can't participate. And so I find myself always competing, and in the nonprofit field, you're always competitive. And I'm pretty sure in the university when you're competing for grants. But I don't share opportunity with my colleagues to eliminate them from not competing. I love the competitiveness because I feel like, I'm as good as who I am, and I shouldn't worry about if somebody else is going to come in and compete. I don't worry about if I honestly sometimes feel like as an Asian American, I have more of an advantage than Caucasian and African American. Because not a lot of Asians go into the nonprofit field. And so there's always looking for diversity, right? And I always feel like even in the workforce, the workforce is shifting. And Serena's now, she's getting her bachelor's degree. And so she's real. And I said, Serena, one of your tools that you have that a lot of your peers at LSU don't have is that you're bilingual. A lot of your American friends don't have another language. There's nothing wrong using that to your advantage at all, because believe me, if they have it, they'll use it as well. And so I always say, it's that's what America's about. It's about being competitive. I get friends that say, well, don't you think sometimes you're discriminated because you're Vietnamese American? I said, hell no. Because if I'm not selected, then it's their loss. Because I feel like I have so much to offer. And I don't ever look at my race as a deterrent for other people because they don't know. They don't like me because I'm Vietnamese American. They don't know. And so sometimes when they don't know, they make poor decisions. And my job is to educate them on who we are. And maybe the next Vietnamese person can get that job. It doesn't have to be me. And so I don't let my race or who I am, I compete just like everybody. And, and I just feel like if I get it, it could be because of my ethnicity. But I also believe that it's because of what I can bring to the table as well. Yeah.
Well, Cyndi, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
No
We really
problem.
appreciate your time and everything that you've done to help our students talk to members of the community. We really appreciate
Oh,
you.
no problem at all. My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.